And, you know, I remember back in the old days when the definitions between genre were much more, perceived by me anyway, to be much more rigid than they are now. When I broke into writing in the 90s, there were very clear distinctions between fantasy and science fiction and what you were and were not allowed to do. And I internalized a lot of those in a way that I feel now with younger writers coming through, like Karin, but not certainly not exclusive to you, lots and lots of new writers coming through are feeling completely free to just do as you say. Write what you want to write and either use the genre mostly as for its tropes, or just let the story come out being whatever it needs to be and leave it to the reader to sort out whether they care. I love it that this is happening. It's so liberating and freeing and wonderful, and I think it's a great thing for the whole field in general, that this kind of cross-pollination and breaking down of these artificial boundaries is going on. So I'm just in the position of happily receiving all of this this new freedom, which I often did not feel when I was writing, even as little as 5 years ago.
Yes, I think I feel a bit like Karin. I'm not that young. My first books, which were also published in the 90s, they were collections of short stories. And I remember one of the mechanisms to get something to write about was to make a long list of genres. And there was like 100 or some in the list at the end. And I just figured I'll make one of each. So, as you go through Western, sci-fi, and it was just sort of a tool to get something and to use the tropes for it. Nowadays, I think I'm in that post-state where it's not really a question of importance. It's just I tell the story, and I guess it's prose, because you know the text goes all the way to the right moment. But other than that, I can't really say what it is, and it's not a question that I concern myself with.
I was thinking about by mixing things up, that can be a way to give new life to certain genres. But some people would probably always would probably say that it's also dilutes the genre, but by doing that. So.
I don't know, just one thing that just crosses my mind, you know, listening to the freedom that you describe, that I think people who are readers might not quite appreciate, is that on the business side of writing, especially at novel length, and I think short story writers, it maybe depends on what markets there are. Like I remember you saying there were 3 markets and then 2 of them died and you had to do something. But in novels, there's a tremendous pressure always coming down from publishers and via one's agent as to what is wanted. And because marketing divisions are very often genre-based, that the work that comes out on the shelves of the bookshop is not necessarily what the author wanted to write, it's what the author was able to sell at that particular time in that particular market. So it's like you might want to write something and just let it come out however it wants to be, but you know in the back of your mind that what your agent really wants is a ghost story. So it would really be a good idea if you could come up with a ghost story right now. And it's there are pressures for novelists. If you want to be published, you've got to have a genre. Like everybody wants to do steampunk recently because that's where the money is. Maybe not so much anymore.
I think that this very capitalistic way of doing it is sort of a curse that you have more in the UK and in the US than you have in Scandinavia, where if you're lucky you have a publisher and they publish it.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and but well, maybe what I said before is not that true, because maybe lately I've sort of come back to the genre things, thinking that you could use this, you can use genres to turn them on their head. And well, the book I'm working on now started out as thinking, I want to make a monster story. And then the monster turned out to be more of an alien, so I think, well, maybe it's a science fiction thing, but I sort of turned the whole thing around. Also quite inspired by an Argentinian writer called Cesar Aira, A-I-R-A. One of the books that he has made that came out in Danish, I think, last year or the year before, is called The Ghosts, simply. And it's a ghost story, but it's sort of turned upside down because it's set at midday in the summer in like a halfway built tenement building, not at night in a castle in Transylvania or something like that. And that's how he described how he came up with the ideas, just to, well, a ghost story and then flip it upside down. And I think that's one way to use genres. And then of course you can also mix things, and as another tool to flip things over.
I was thinking about the publisher's need to fit something into a genre. We do have that to a certain extent. Depending on the size of the publisher. When I was published with a larger publisher in Sweden, they were really scrabbling for a genre definition because they wanted, but partly because they wanted to reach a certain readership. But also because it feels like the publishing industry in Sweden doesn't really allow for for a book without label, be it mainstream or mystery or science fiction or what have you. So what they did is they applied a genre label that it's not really accurate, but they needed something, and that feels like it's symptomatic, at least for the bigger publishers. Something that's very interesting that's shown up in recent years is that the label weird fiction has been sort of welcomed with open arms, because it's yet another label that allows people to put that which they cannot describe into a new box, which is very handy. That's how humans think. But that sort of icky, iffy, in-between stuff finally gets a box of its own, which is kind of, I don't know if ironic. I might be using ironic in the same way that Alanis Morissette uses ironic, but which
it's a bit of an oxymoron.
Yes, yeah. That in searching for something that defies definition, we've instead turned it into something that's fairly sharply defined.
Is that true, though, in terms of the texts themselves, do you think, or is that just a convenience on the part of people?
Oh, it's on the part of people, yeah.
As long as the writers and the readers themselves feel free to do whatever they want.
Yeah, no, the whole genre definition thing is, I mean, that's something you do after the fact. I don't know a lot of writers who actually consider fitting into, within the confines of the genre when writing. That's something that's applied later on.
So if writers are beyond labels and readers are well, then maybe publishers should get with the program.
But are the readers beyond labels? Because
I'm not sure.
I think we should go to the audience for that one.
I'm not sure readers are beyond labels either, because readers I talk to, one of the first things they ask is, what do you write? And they don't mean, do I write short stories or long stories or whatever. They want to know what genre it is, so that they, after hearing what label it is, then they can decide if it's interesting or not. But I think that's the way the human brain works. We're evolved to categorize things because it's an excellent tool for surviving in the wild. And we sort of carried it over into modern life.
Because you have also worked at a bookstore, at a science fiction bookstore.
Yeah.
So you know how people react to genres and what
from what I remember, yeah, people were many. I cannot absolutely not say all, but very many people who, for example, came for recommendations or who commented on books were fairly specific on what kind of genres they wanted to read, and it was fairly rare that someone specifically asked for something that kind of that fucked around with genre definitions. They would ask, I need a good space opera. I need a good sword and sorcery fantasy book. Get me the best of that type, which means the most typical of that type. Maybe I'm a bit of a misanthrope here, I don't know.
I think it's safe to say that we live in a culture that I have all this stuff going around in my mind from conversations that were happening yesterday informally about this whole idea of categorizing things and how things are sold and how things are marketed, and the idea of, it came up in a panel I think yesterday, and I can't remember who said it, but she said, when I get a Netflix, I watch a movie, it then gives me a list of, if you like such and such, you will also like this. And it's the same thing on Amazon. And we have all these predictive algorithms that are telling us what genre we like. So we're kind of surrounded by that and we're immersed in it. How much of that is our fault and how much of it is just what we've become used to, I don't know. Because I know as a parent, that my kids, when they go for something, it's not at all obvious when they were younger what they were going to go for in terms of toys or things on television or whatever. Sometimes they went for things that were quite unlike other things that they liked. And I'm not sure whether it's natural or not. It doesn't really matter, but the point is it's a surround. We're living in this surround where everything's being hyper-organized and hyper-compartmentalized. And for a creative person, that's pretty torturous. It's really deadening unless, as you say, you take it upon yourself to play with it and subvert it. Maybe that's what the new generation, to me I see it as a generational thing. I see the younger writers being much, much more free. And it's true, weird fiction that's coined by China Miéville. I can remember reading Perdido Street Station right before it came out, and I can remember being struck by the way that he felt so free to put in science and magic and all kinds of other things, and thinking that this was wonderful, and it has started to turn into a movement, which is which is great.
Are they going to do
Movements.
movements?
Oh no, I wouldn't know. No,
I wish.
movement.
Yeah, I just got some very weird pictures.
But it's really a breath of fresh air from my point of view, and maybe there's a generation of writers that have seen that it can be done. In the case of China, with spectacular commercial success, which was never expected. I mean, I met him when his first novel was coming out, and he never expected to become a media figure or any of the, I think he wanted to, but no one knew when that book came out what it was going to start off. And it must have resonated in a lot of readers and writers. There must have been a need to break out of all of this stuff and open the gates again.